So I want to start by saying thank you everyone for coming. My name is Cody Armstrong and we are talking about version control, branching, and merging here today. So if you spent some time in Onshape and you're ready to start creating versions, branching off of those versions, and maybe even merging them together, that's what we're going to focus on today. Short webinar, really just a few key pieces of Onshape. We're not really going to focus so much on the CAD features and the CAD creation tools, but all the management aspects of working with documents in Onshape. So as I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions. I'll do my best from time to time to stop and make sure to answer any questions that pop up. You have a questions dialog and you go to webinar panel, feel free to type anything in and I'll do my best to make sure they're all addressed. Again, especially short webinar today, feel free to ask any questions as we're going through things here. So let's dig in. Now, before I get into the topic of the day, there are a few things about Onshape I'd like to mention, and the first is its mission statement. So if you're new to Onshape, our goal with Onshape is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And this means mobile devices. So if you haven't downloaded the Onshape app for your Android device or your iOS device, your iPad or your iPhone, I definitely recommend it. It's a full-blown CAD editing tool, so you can work with people creating sketches and features and assemblies from a mobile device. But it's not just mobile devices, it also includes Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks, really any WebGL connected machine you can get access to Onshape with. So everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere you are. Now, the other thing I like to mention about Onshape is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, it's really three pieces. It's parts, assemblies, and of course drawings. And we do have all three major pieces that make up a professional 3D CAD system. Some things that are unique about Onshape is how quickly we evolve. So you're going to see updates to Onshape roughly every 3 weeks, and there's little to nothing that the user has to do in order to see those updates, right? Refreshing the page might be the most amount of work that you have to do to see any kind of changes. So, no interaction, no need for the user to do anything. You just see new functionality and it's evolving very quickly. So parts, assemblies, and drawings, and you'll see those move very quickly. Another thing that's unique about Onshape is built-in version control. So with Onshape, you do not need a separate data management application. It's very much what we're going to talk about here today is, how do we manage major milestones? How do we manage versions within Onshape? So version control is built into the core, and it's a lot of what we're going to talk about here today. Now, the other important aspects that I like to mention about Onshape, if you've come from another CAD system, we can read and write a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there today. So Step, IGES, Parasolid, and even the native files like SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, CATIA, a number of different formats, DXF, DWG as well, that we can both read and write. So just keep that in mind. It makes Onshape a good tool to work alongside an existing CAD system. It makes it easy to take your existing CAD data and import it and reuse it. We can read and write a lot of what's out there today. The last thing I want to mention is with Onshape, we've introduced entirely new methods of collaboration. So if you haven't shared your document yet, there's a big share icon in the top right corner. I definitely recommend it. You just enter their email address, you define their permissions, and you hit share. And they can be looking at the same document you are, and you can even work together in real time. So that's something we've never been able to do before in CAD is, have multiple people looking at the same assembly at once. Everybody is aware of what's going on at all times. There's no check-in or check-out or any of those kinds of tedious workflows. So entirely new methods of collaboration. I definitely recommend sharing your document. It's not just real-time collaboration. It's integrated markup and comment capabilities. It's integrated follow mode that allows you to see each other's screen in real time. There's all kinds of cool stuff that's kind of built into Onshape's collaborative tools. So those are just some things I like to mention about Onshape in general. Now we're going to get to the topic of the day, and the goals for today are really simple. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be a short webinar. We're really just going to focus on a few key aspects of Onshape and really just how we manage data and variations and bringing everything together and seeing the differences. So it's real simple. How do we create versions? That's going to be the first thing. How do we create a version? What does a version do? How does it work? And then comparing. Remember with Onshape, you can compare two versions. So I can compare revision A to revision B. I can compare two moments in history. So I can compare my design today to some date 6 months ago, for example. And you can also compare two branches, which is what we're going to talk about also today, where we build a branch or a variation of our design in its own separate workspace You can also compare branches as well. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is branch and, of course, merge. Now, I do show you an example of both of those, but it's important to keep in mind that there are many scenarios where you may branch and never merge. So they're not, you don't have to do one with the other. Branching and merging are two totally independent things, but it is a neat capability to be able to take two branches and merge the differences between them. So branch and merge, those will be the last two things. As I mentioned before, feel free to ask any questions. There's a questions dialog, and you go to webinar control panel. Just type in anything, and I'll do my best to stop and address them. So real short agenda today. Let's dig in. If there's anyone having audio issues, please let me know. I've gotten one comment on it, but let me know if anyone else is having any kind of audio or any kind of issues hearing me. All right, so let's get into it. Now, versions. Versions are pretty straightforward. Think of a version as a milestone. I've reached this point where I want to capture the document. I want to capture the state of everything in the document. Now, it's important to keep in mind we have versions, but we also have history, and history is an entirely different thing. And you can think of history as a step-by-step list of everything that's been done to the document, whereas versions are intended to capture milestones in your design. Revisions, some people refer to them as revisions or versions or whatever the name may be. It's really just about I want to be able to go back and look at the state of this document at any time because it's a major milestone. And maybe it's I'm revision A, we're sending this out to the shop floor, and I want to be able to go back and look at the drawings of revision A, or I want to be able to go back and look at the model at revision A. That's where a version comes into play. Now, the key things to keep in mind with versions, they are view only. Once a version is created, it cannot be changed, right? So it's a view-only snapshot of the entire document. And that includes all parts, assemblies, drawings, and even files that you've imported. So you can version control your imported SolidWorks parts or IGES or Parasolid. So you can version control imported files as well. A version captures the state of everything in the document. So it captures the state of the parts, the assemblies, the drawings at that moment that you create version. Every single tab is snapshot, right? You get a version of every single tab. The main thing that with versions, and I've already briefly pointed this out, is they're great for going back and looking at previous versions and looking at, what did the model look like? Maybe I need to download this part as it was at revision A. That's where a version comes in handy. You can select the version, go in and download the models, or just take a look at them, measure them, look at the drawing. So great for reviewing. And if think of those scenarios where is there any time where I'd need to go back and look at the state of this document? That's where you need to create a version. Okay, so a quick question: will the webinar be available for future review, feature review, or future review? Forgive me. Yes, this is recorded. Everyone that registered will get a link to the recording probably within 24 hours. We try and do our best to give it within 24 hours. All right, so let's dig in. Now, I want to jump right into Onshape and show you how to create a version. Now, it's extremely simple. There are some things to keep in mind, but it's extremely basic how to create a version. So let's get into that. Now, let's just assume this is my drive shaft, and I've already captured a few major milestones, but I've made some changes, and now I need to capture a version the way it sits now. As I mentioned before, this is the assembly, but here is my part studio, right, with the same, parts built with all my features. And of course, I have a PDF here as well. This is just a PDF to go along with it. So I want to capture a major, revision here. And we do that with versions. Now, there are two ways to create a version. We have the new create version icon right here in the top left. And what that does is it creates a version and automatically gives it a name. In this case, the name will be V1 or V2 or V3, depending on where you're at in your versions. But it's a very easy way to just easily create a version. One button and it's done, right? Again, if you're fine with the V1, V2 names, it's the simplest method for creating a version. You just click this icon. And again, it snapshots the entire document. You can also create a version from the versions manager. So we have a versions manager in history just next to that. If you click that icon, it launches the versions manager. And this is where you access your versions. So if I select the versions manager, you'll see I have revision A and revision B. So I've already created two versions, and I have the option to create another. So if I want to create a new version, we'll say revision C, right? I can hit create, and now I have three versions, A, B, and C. Now, at any point, I can go in and take a look at revision A, for example. And to do that, I left-click it in the feature list, or in the versions manager. So just left-click revision A in the versions manager, and it loads. So again, the idea behind it is now I'm going back. I'm going back to, in my case, January 19th, and I'm taking a look at revision A as it was created at that moment. There are some things to notice. It's subtle, but this is overall a shorter drive shaft. The ends, the colors have been changed, the materials have been changed. And also notice that the PDF I showed you a moment ago is gone, because at revision A, that PDF did not exist. Right? It wasn't until revision B that was imported into the document. So it's important to keep in mind adding or deleting tabs. All of that is tracked with the version manager. So again, what did the document look like at the moment you clicked create version? That's what you're capturing. And the neat thing is now I can go back and say, okay, let's export the parts as they stood at this moment. Or let's export the DXFs of the drawings as they stood at this moment. Or even just let's measure, what these values are. You can do all of that by taking a look at previous versions. Okay, but versions themselves are very easy to create. You just go, to the versions manager, hit create version, type in a name, and hit save. You can even just click the one button, and V1, V2, V3 are very easy to create that method as well. But the main thing I want to point out is the idea behind versions is they allow you to go back and look at previous states of the document. Okay? And it even goes as far as more tabs, less tabs, obviously design changes, things you've imported and exported. You can even update data. So if I've imported a PDF, for example, I can right-click and update it with a newer version of the PDF. So you get version control of the CAD models, the assemblies, the drawings, but also anything that you've imported. PDFs, SolidWorks parts, step images, parasolid files, DXFs, all those things can be version control. So versions, very easy to do. You'll see the versions manager here. Again, just think of it as a snapshot of the entire document. The key thing is you cannot modify it. So, it's a major milestone. So that is creating versions. Now, I'd like to jump into my next example here, and that is compare. Now, it very much ties in with versions, although you can compare just, really anything. But compare is one of those tools that's definitely underused and really powerful once a user gets the hang of it. It's one of those tools that's huge if you're looking for ways of what's the differences between these two things. This is a great tool for that. It gives you both a graphical and a list-based comparison. So you get the nice, pretty graphics changer. You'll see the screenshot I have there on the left showing you the differences dynamically. But you also get a list, and I think the list is the more valuable, but you get exactly what features are different, what's different between those features. It's very granular and allows you to see, in very close detail, what's the differences. Now, there are three things when we talk about compare. You can compare two versions, which we're going to cover here today. So just like I was showing you, I can compare revision C to revision A or revision B. So I can compare, two versions. I can compare two branches. So if I branch off my design and I build two variations of it, I can compare those two variations. And then the neat thing is you can also compare two moments in history. So you don't even have to create a branch or a version. You can take a look. You can go into your history or your version manager today, go back to a moment in history a few months ago and hit compare, and it will show you the difference between your design today and your design, whatever you selected in the history. So even two moments in history can be compared. So this is definitely a very cool tool. So let's jump into it. Now, compare again is very simple, but there is one important thing I want to point out with it, and that is, what are you comparing to and from? And that's an important concept for compare, and it's also an important concept for merging later on, which we're going to discuss. So if I go into this example here, you'll see I have this swing arm, part, this rocker arm part. And what I'd like to do is compare the design as it sits here to my revision A. And if I left click revision A, give it a moment to load, you'll see that there are some differences. There are some key differences to them. And it's not really obvious at first, but there's a huge boss that's missing here. These cuts are different. The overall part is narrower than it was. So it's a shorter part. There's a big boss that's missing, and there's some cut differences here. But, besides just, eyeballing it, so to speak, just looking at the differences, by switching back and forth, how do I know exactly what's different between them? And that's where compare comes into play. Now, it's important to keep in mind, the from and to, and the idea behind that is what's active. So I just left click revision A, that made it active. Then I left click the main, and now it's active. And you'll notice that big boss is back. The part is overall longer. The cuts are a bit different. So I'm back to my current state of the model. So I have revision A, I have main. They were created several months apart, or they have been modified several months apart. Now I want to see the differences. The important thing is you're comparing a from and to. So I want to compare the changes from main to revision A. And that's the way to think of it. So in my case, main is highlighted. It's the active. And I want to choose the version I want to compare it to. In this case, revision A. Now, if you have revision A, B, and C, you would need to decide, which one do I want to compare it to. But in my case, I want to compare it to revision A. So I choose the gear drop down under revision A, and you'll see the option to compare. I choose compare, and it launches compare. So again, the key thing there is what do you want to compare, what do you want to be active, and what do you want to compare the active to? All right, so this is compare, and I'm going to focus first on the list-based comparison. I think that gives you the most detail. So I mentioned before you get a nice graphics, representation of the differences, but you also get a very specific list of what's different. So I can see in this list that sketch 1 is not the same. I can see that extrude 1 is not the same. And if you left-click the feature, it will actually tell you what's different. So in my case, I left-click extrude, and it highlights that the main version has a 20 millimeter depth for the extrusion, whereas revision A was 22 millimeters depth for the extrusion. So I can see it even highlights the differences between features. I can go into, for instance, these lightning hole features and tell the differences, or this fillet and tell the differences. Right? I can see this fillet had in main only 4 edges are highlighted for the fillet, but in revision A there's 6 edges highlighted, and the radius size is different. In revision A it was 5 millimeters. In main it is 4 millimeters for the radius size of this fillet. So you're getting a breakdown of individual edges and the radius size differences. So it shows you the differences between features. It also shows you features that exist in one but don't exist in another. So for instance, fillet 7 exists in revision A, does not exist in main. And you'll see the little indicator here indicating it's in one but not the other. And the same thing goes for the opposite direction. So chamfer 1 exists in main but does not exist in revision A. And the same thing goes for this extrude 13, which, by the way, is that big boss on the far left corner here. Extrude 13 exists in main but did not exist in revision A. So the key things I want to point out here is just that you have a very specific list of all the differences. If you want to know exactly what's different between this and 6 months ago, you can do that. Or if you want to know exactly what's different between this and another branch, you can do that. So this is the list-based comparison. I'm going to go ahead and collapse it. And you also get the nice graphics slider. You can grab this slider and drag it to the right, and it will dynamically show you the differences between the two. I'm going slow just for the sake of GoToWebinar so everyone kind of gets the idea, but it's just a slider, preview slider that shows you graphically the difference between the two parts. It's very simple. So that is Compare, definitely one of the underused tools that I think is really powerful capability and allows you to see, kind of dynamically what the differences are. Important question when we're talking about Compare is how do you get out of Compare once you're done? And that's in the top left corner. You have Main and Revision A. So you decide where you want to go back to. In my case, I want to go back to Main, so I left click it, and it takes me back to the main branch. Okay? So now I've left Compare. So key thing, Compare is definitely one of those tools that's underused, and I think that is a pretty powerful one. And again, it's not just versions, it could be moments in history or branches as well. Okay, so let's get into our next topic, and that is branching. Now, branching, there are a few things to keep in mind. Um, you can only branch from a defined version. So the first step in creating a branch is creating a version and then branching off of that version. You cannot branch off of an active workspace. And the reason is because those workspaces are changing. So you can't branch off a design that's changing. You have to branch off of a fixed version and then move on from there. So you can only branch from a defined version. It creates a workspace that's entirely independent from the others. And that means you can add and delete tabs. You can do anything you want in that branch, and it has no impact whatsoever on any other branches. So it creates an entirely independent workspace from the others, which is a great way to try out different designs. Maybe you have two people who I want each one to be able to build their own variation. We decide and then we change and we merge that back into the main. So you can create totally independent workspaces where, the impacts don't affect each other, and then merge that back in later, which we're going to talk about in a second. So great for building variations. A question often comes up, well, what if I have, I have this product and I make 10 different sizes of it. They're all very similar, but they're 10 different sizes, nominal dimensions, for example. And that's a great example of creating branches. Also, it allows multiple people to work in their own sandbox to experiment with design changes and not impact each other. Right? With Onshape, two people can work on the same assembly at the same time. You may not always want that. Or what if I want two people to be able to work on their own space and then decide to merge that with changes in the future? So that's the idea behind branching. Now, real quick question: is there a way to import two revisions of a part, revision A and revision B, created outside of Onshape into Onshape and perform a comparison? That's a good question. You can definitely import. I mean, what I would do in this scenario, and this is just me thinking off the top of my head, so forgive me. I would export or just save revision 1, let's say, of the part, and then import that in. Create a version, capture revision 1, whatever you want to call it, and then right-click the tab and update. And what that will do is update, import the new version, revision 2. Now the question would be, can you compare those two? And you're not going to get a list-based comparison in that scenario. So this may be kind of a moot point. Remember, when you import something from outside of Onshape, the step I just Parasolid, SolidWorks, or whatever, it does not import the feature list. So a lot of what I showed you there was dependent on Onshape's feature list, the list-based comparisons. So I think that may be a limitation. You may be a graphical comparison, but certainly not a list-based comparison between them. Okay, so let's take a look at branching. Now, branching is its own topic, and we're going to get into merging in just a second. But I do want to mention that you can create as many branches as you'd like and never merge. So there are many users out there who want to build variations but never have any need to merge them back together. And I'm going to show you them together, but it's important to point out they are independent functions. You can do one and not the other. So let's go over branching first. I have a simple arbor press, and I would like to capture some variations of the design. Maybe I have two engineers and we want to explore two different variations of the base. We want to build two small changes in the base. But this is the way our product is currently sold. So I want to make sure that I create a version so that I can always go back and look at this state of the model. Also, as I mentioned before, you can't branch off of, in this case, the main workspace, the active space. You have to establish a version, a view-only version, to branch off of. So that's the first step. I'm going to create version. We'll call this our initial version. Okay, I'll hit create, and now I have, of course, my version. Right, we've already discussed that. Now we have something that we can branch off of. So here I have initial version, and I can branch off of this. So under the gear menu, under initial version, you'll see branch to create workspace. Now what I'd like to do is build two versions. We're going to build one called base with tabs. You see, I keep calling it version. We're going to build two branches. Base with tabs is the first, and the second, we're going to build one version of this with a square base. All right, so we'll say square base. Okay. So I've created two branches off of that initial version. One, I'd like to explore a design that has a square base, and the other, I'd like to explore a design of a base with tabs. And the key thing here is, again, now I've established these two branches. You'll see them in the versions manager here. I have these two branches. They're totally independent of one another. If I make a change to this one, it does not impact the base with tabs. It's also important to keep in mind main is still an active space. So I can jump into main, left click it, and keep making changes to the model. Right? Main is just another workspace, and oftentimes it's considered, the primary workspace. But there's no reason for that specifically. You can create any branch you want and continue working on it. So in this case, let's say I wanted to make a change to main. And I'm going to make a simple change, and I want to explain this change a little bit in more detail later on. But I want to fillet the spine of this in main. So I'm going to do a quick fillet. I'm in main. I'm going to choose fillet. We'll do an 1/8 inch fillet along the spine of the arbor press. Okay. So again, not a big change, but I do want to make a change in main. There's my fillet. Just to highlight, notice that you get feedback as to what the last changed branch was. So in this case, the main branch is the last changed because I'm in main and I made a change to it. So it jumps ahead in the list. Now, if I left click base with tabs, actually, let's do square tabs first. Let's left click square tabs. Now you'll notice when I left click the square tabs and it loads that there is no fillet. Okay. So there's no fillet along that spine. Again, because it's in a different branch, the change I made in main did not impact any of the other branches. Okay. Now, I want to make a change to this design and turn it into a square base. So we're building two versions of this arbor press. I want one with a square base, one with a base with tabs. So let's go through and make that change. Now I'm going to go into Extrude 5. We'll edit. And I want to add just a few more faces to this extrude command. Okay. Taking it from the shape it is in now to a square base. Okay, so I've highlighted all the faces that I'd like. To turn this part, let's get that one, into a square base. There we go. So again, all I'm really doing here is changing an extrude feature, in this case, to a square-shaped extrude, which is going to change the base design, going down in the tree. Notice that, again, now the base is square compared to the radius shape that it was before, but all the features have rebuilt and it looks good. So we now have our square base design. Right? Real simple changes, I know, but for the sake of time, I just want to illustrate square base. Now, if I jump back into my versions manager, notice square base jumps ahead as the most actively edited branch. But in this case, now I'd like to build the base with tabs. So I left click base with tabs. It loads. Again, you won't see any of the changes made in any other branches. So no fillets, no square base, all of that is independent. So now what I can do is let's go in and add another extrude. Okay, so let's roll back here. I'll roll back to just after my extrude feature, And what we can do is create a new extrude and extrude the tabs that I have in the sketch here. Okay, again, a subtle change, a simple change, but the idea behind it is I'm merging it. Actually, let's make that just a bit bigger. There we go. So now I've extruded just some simple tabs on the part. Nothing terribly complicated, but something maybe to mount this. I'll press down. We'll roll to the end, let it rebuild. And now we have a base with tabs. So again, I know I'm not making really complex changes here, but the idea is to illustrate, okay, now we have a square base in the branches, and we have a base with tabs. Okay. So we've built these different variations. I have base with tabs. If I left click square base, it loads, and we have the square base design. And we still have main. We still have the main branch, which the only real change made to it was that fillet down the spine. So let's say that we have these design changes, and we decide, going forward, we have these two experiments. We like the base with tabs better. And we want to take the changes from base with tabs and merge those into the main workspace. So now we're going from just simple branching, which again, you can create as many branches as you'd like and never merge. But if you decide you want to take changes from one branch and merge them with another, you can do that too. So let's get into merge. Now, merge is a little bit more advanced topic. There are some elements to it that I want to explain. So I have just a few slides here. But my fillet, before we get into the slides, my fillet on the spine here wasn't an accident. I did that on purpose. I want to go into base with tabs, right? We'll go into base with tabs, and I want to create a conflicting feature. And I want to do this just to show you what happens when there's a feature conflict, because those scenarios will happen when you're merging. So remember, we had in main a fillet down the spine. I want to create a chamfer on the same spine, right? Obviously, when I merge, both can't exist at the same time. So I'm deliberately causing a merge conflict. Now, you may have no conflicts in your design when you merge and everything just goes together fine. But there will be scenarios where you have some kind of conflict between features, and I want to show you what happens there. So again, now we have base with tabs. It has a chamfer. If I go back to main, it's our original design, but with a fillet down the spine. And what I'd like to do is take those tabs in the separate branch. I want to merge those changes with main. But what happens to the spine? And so let's get into some of the logic of merge. So bear with me for just a moment. I think it's important to explain what's happening here. With merge, it's a very similar idea to the comparing, in the sense that there's a from and a to, an active and what you're merging from. And in many situations, it solves with no issues, right? Because I have no conflict. So here's an example where I have a block with a hole, a block with some fillets, and you end up with a block with some fillets and a hole, right? Because there's no conflicting features. Everything works as expected, right? So you get the best of everything. The corner fillets, in this case, from this, get pushed into the end result. But what happens if things are a bit different? What if that happens if there's some conflicts? In particular, dimension conflicts and feature conflicts. So here I have the active branch, and it has chamfers and a hole. I have the from branch, which has fillets on those same edges and is shorter, and the result is the hole with chamfers, and of course is shorter. And you may ask why. Why did the chamfers win, so to speak, over the fillets? And it has to do with active, the from, and the to. So jumping a bit into the logic here, Onshape looks at the features that have been edited and applies them based on a to and from. The active branch will win if there's a conflict concerning features, right? So the active in my example before was the chamfers. Therefore, the chamfers win and the fillet fails. It errors out, right? So the active branch will win if there's a conflict concerning features. However, if there's a dimension conflict, right? In the case of my last example, one was longer, one was shorter. The one you're merging to wins, right? And the idea there is, that's the most common workflow, the most common example when I'm merging to and from. Now, in the really odd case of a tie, there may be an error, but it's extremely, extremely rare. And I should say an error in the feature, not necessarily an error in the merge. So there is a logic to it. Now, I know this is a bit much to explain at first, so let's jump into an example and try and make it a little bit more real life. So here I have the main workspace. Again, no tabs, and it has the fillet. I want to take the base with tabs branch and merge it with main. It's important to think of it that way. I want to take the changes from here and push them to here. I want to merge them to here because the from to makes a difference. From to. And it could be the inverse. I want to take the changes from main and push them to base with tabs. So remember, you have flexibility there, and what's the from and what's the to. Now, how do you define that? Well, the first step is defining what do you want to merge to. In my case, I want to merge the changes from base with tabs to main. So I left click main to make it active. And that's your first step. You want to make the branch you're merging to active. So I left click main, it's now active. Then I go to the branch I want to merge from, and under the gear dropdown, I choose merge into current workspace. Okay, so I choose merge into current workspace being main, and it takes the changes from that workspace and merges it with my current one. Okay, so if you'll notice, now I'm in main, and main has tabs. Okay, so if I jump back into the versions manager here, you'll notice main is now the most recently updated, and the tabs from the base with tabs branch have been merged with this branch. Okay, also notice the fillet. Okay, if I jump down into the bottom of my feature list here, you'll see chamfer 5 has failed. Okay, just showing you the from to logic. The feature conflict, the active branch wins. And in this case, the active branch was main, and main had a fillet. Right, the base with tabs had a chamfer, but it was what we're merging from. So therefore, the chamfer fails. Okay, so of course, the answer here is just to simply delete it. But I wanted to deliberately illustrate a feature conflict just to show you what happens. What happens in those scenarios. So, that's really it. The key things with merge is what's active and what do you want to merge from. And once you've defined that, select what you want to be active, and then select what you want to merge the changes from. Okay. So that is the merge command. And that's really what I had planned for you here today. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. I have a few last minute things to say, but again, feel free to type in any questions. I am going to jump back into my slide. Just bear with me. So going forward, if you're just getting started with Onshape, really encourage you to try Onshape in your professional environment and let us know what you think. There's a feedback tool built into Onshape. We've tried to make it very easy to give us feedback. So really, try it out and let us know what you think. Also, invite others and share. If you haven't shared your document, if you haven't used the invite friends dialog there in the top right of the documents page and invited someone to Onshape, really encourage you to do so. It's just a matter of entering their email address. Even if they don't have an Onshape account, you can share a document with them. We create an account on the fly for them. Also, if you've been using Onshape a while and maybe you're interested in establishing a local user group, we'd love to hear from you. I know this is something we're growing and we're adding user groups, fairly often. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you set yours up and get things going. So that's what I had planned. Again, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions. So feel free to type them in. But that's it, everyone. Thank you and have a good day.